It was an unusually bright spring morning. The sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, painting fanciful patterns on the faded wallpaper in my bedroom. I sat in the old rocking chair Hamish had given me for our 20th wedding anniversary. I remember him saying then, "Agatha, dear, you will now have a special place to read your favorite books." That was 32 years ago. Hamish passed away 5 years ago, a sudden heart attack. Sometimes I think I can still hear the floorboards creaking under his heavy footsteps. We bought our house on Elm Street when I was 33. Now I'm 73, and every corner of this house holds a piece of our lives. Hamish's desk still stands in the study, and I hesitate to change anything. His antique clock still ticks away on the mantelpiece in the living room, though it's 2 minutes behind. Hamish always said it gave him extra time to make important decisions. I worked as a literature teacher for 41 years in a local school. Generations of Bellefonte children have passed through my classroom. Many of them are now grandparents themselves. When I go out to the store, I often hear, "Mrs. Hawthorne, do you remember me? I sat in the third desk in 1898." And I smile, even though I can't always remember their names. A lot has changed since Hamish died. The garden is gradually going wild. My hands are no longer nimble enough to deal with the weeds. Beatrice, our only daughter, offered to hire a gardener, but I refused. This is the garden Hamish and I created together, and now let it grow as it will. The sundial in the center of the garden is another gift from Hamish. "Time passes only when the sun shines," he liked to say. And on rainy days, it's as if life stops. That's what's happening now. It's as if my life has frozen since he left. Putting down my unread novel, I went to the kitchen. The old kettle was already whistling on the stove. While the tea brewed, I looked out the window at the apple tree we'd planted the year Beatrice was born. It's a mighty tree now, yielding so many apples I don't have time to process them. I used to make jam and compotes, but in recent years, I've just been giving the harvest away to neighbors. Beatrice. Our relationship has always been complicated. When she was young, she rebelled against everything Hamish and I thought was right. "You're suffocating me with your rules," she'd yell, slamming the door. I was a strict mother, perhaps too strict. Hamish usually softened my demands by finding compromises. Without him, it was as if Beatrice and I were on opposite sides of a river. We could see each other, but we couldn't get close. At 22, she married Edmund Thornton, a man Hamish and I had never fully accepted. There was something insincere in his smile, something calculating in his gaze. "He looks at our house like an auction item," Hamish once remarked. I brushed it off then, thinking it was just normal parental jealousy. But now, years later, I realized that my husband saw right through people. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Strange. Beatrice usually calls before she visits. The last time she stopped by was 2 weeks ago, bringing groceries and a new blood pressure medicine, even though I didn't ask for it. "Mom, you have to watch your health," she said in a tone that didn't tolerate objection, a tone she had adopted from me. When I opened the door, I saw Beatrice and Edmund. My daughter was impeccably dressed, as always a smart suit, the pearl earrings Hamish had given her for graduation. Edmund stood slightly behind, smiling his trademark smile that didn't affect his eyes. "Mom, you weren't answering your phone." Beatrice kissed my cheek, leaving a faint trace of expensive perfume. "My phone was dead and I hadn't noticed," I lied. I didn't really want to talk. "Mrs. Hawthorne, you look lovely." Edmund bowed gallantly. "These spring days certainly suit you." I invited them in, feeling a little wary. Beatrice's uninvited visits usually meant she was up to something. "Tea's just ready," I said, heading for the kitchen. "Have a seat." Beatrice looked around the living room with a critical eye. "Mother, it's so dusty in here. Why don't you let me hire an au pair? We've talked about this." I don't need another woman in the house, I said, setting down the cups. I'm doing just fine on my own. Of course, Mrs. Hawthorne, Edmund interjected, sitting down in Hamish's chair. I've always been annoyed at his way of taking seats that don't belong to him. But at your age, you can afford some comforts. At my age, Edmund, I know what I need and what I don't, I retorted, glancing at the chair he was occupying. He pretended not to notice and continued to smile. Beatrice, meanwhile, was studying the pictures on the mantelpiece. You still haven't put the old pictures away, she said, touching the picture of Hamish and me standing in front of the Eiffel Tower. It's been 5 years, Mom. Why do I have to clean them up? I asked, pouring the tea. It's my life, your father's and my life. Beatrice sighed and sat down on the sofa. We're worried about you. She began a familiar song. This house is too big for one person. It costs money to maintain, and it's hard for you to keep up with everything. I have enough money, I reminded her. Your father had thought of everything. Yes, Dad was always thoughtful. Beatrice exchanged a quick glance with her husband. But prices are going up, and so are taxes. Are you sure your savings will be enough for everything? I sipped my tea, watching them over my cup. What are they trying to accomplish this time? I have a 40-year teacher's pension, Hamish's insurance, and his investments. Believe me, I won't be begging you for charity. Edmund coughed softly. Minus Mrs. Hawthorne, it was the investments I wanted to talk about. The bank has some new programs that could increase your income. With your permission, I've been looking at Mr. Hawthorne's account totals. You did what? I put the cup on the table. Who gave you the right? Mom, don't start. Beatrice rolled her eyes. Edmund works at the same bank. He's just looking out for your welfare. I'm an investment consultant, Edmund reminded her. I can see that your funds are not being used optimally. Some shares should be sold. Some should be bought. I could help. My husband has managed these investments for 30 years, I replied coldly. I don't see any reason to change. The market has changed, Mrs. Hawthorne. Edmund leaned forward. What worked 10 years ago may not be effective now. Let me help. I saw Beatrice furtively glance at her watch. They were obviously up to something, so I decided to find out what it was. And how do you propose to help me, Edmund? He glowered, thinking I'd given in. We need to go to the bank, do some paperwork. Nothing complicated, just so I can manage your portfolio. Believe me, your income will increase by at least 15% in the first year. That's it. They want access to my accounts. Why don't you just advise me on what changes to make? I asked. I can do the paperwork myself. It's a complicated process, Mom, Beatrice interjected. You'll have to go to the bank several times, fill out a lot of paperwork. Edmund can do it all in one go. If you allow access to account management, Edmund added. Just formally, of course. You'll always be aware of all the transactions. I remembered what Hamish had once said about Edmund. Never sign anything he suggests. I thought it was prejudice at the time. Now I realize it was a warning. I need to think about it, I replied. I don't make financial decisions spontaneously. Beatrice pressed her lips together. Mom, you're overcomplicating things. We want what's best for us. For whom, Beatrice? I looked at my daughter carefully. For me or for you? What do you mean? Her eyes narrowed. At times like this, she looked strikingly like me, the same crease between her eyebrows, the same stubborn look. Just asking, I shrugged. The sudden concern for my finances seemed odd, considering we hadn't discussed it in years. Edmund quickly interjected, Mrs. Hawthorne, this is a professional concern. I see older people lose money every day because of poor investment decisions. I don't want the same thing to happen to you. Older people? I repeated. So now I'm just an old person who can't manage their money? Mom, come on. Beatrice stood up. No one is saying you're incapable. We're offering help, and you're taking it as an attack. I noticed Edmund pulling a folded piece of paper from the inside pocket of his jacket. I've sketched out a rough plan, he said, unfolding the document. Maybe when you see the figures, you'll understand our proposal better. I took the sheet and began to read. Among the financial terms and percentages, my eye caught the phrase full trust management. Now everything fell into place. You want me to give you control of all my accounts, I said, handing the paper back. Only for optimization, Edmund answered quickly. You'll still be the owner. You just won't have to do the routine. What about the house? I asked bluntly. Is that part of the optimization too? Beatrice and Edmund exchanged glances. Mom, we've talked about this. Beatrice sat down next to me and took my hand. This house is not a good investment. Taxes, repairs, maintenance. If you sold it now, when the market's up, you could get a good deal. We could buy you a cozy apartment closer to us and invest the rest. I carefully released my hand. This is the house I've lived in for 40 years. Every corner of it reminds me of Hamish. It's not an investment, Beatrice. This is my home. Sentiment costs money, Mrs. Hawthorne, said Edmund, and money has a way of running out. I have enough money to keep the house for the rest of my life, I said. Hamish had it all figured out. Hamish couldn't have foreseen inflation and rising taxes, Edmund countered. The economic situation was changing. Beatrice sighed as if she were talking to a stubborn child. Mother, we just want to secure your future, and we want to take care of your inheritance, not for ourselves, she added quickly, but for our children, your grandchildren, my grandchildren who come once a year for Christmas, and then only reluctantly. The last time, the oldest, Brandon, was on the phone all evening, and the youngest, Claudia, didn't even say hello. I appreciate your concern, I said, but I don't see the need for such drastic measures. Edmund adjusted his tie, a gesture he always did when he was annoyed. Mrs. Hawthorne, let's at least go to the bank. We'll consult with the experts. If you decide not to sign the documents, no one will insist. I looked at him, then at Beatrice. Her face was impatient and annoyed. At that moment, I realized clearly that they would not back down. They would come again and again, wearing me down until I gave in. Maybe I should go to the bank. Not to sign their papers, but to clear the air. After all, Norton Burroughs, the branch manager, was a friend of Hamish's. They played golf together on weekends. Okay, I finally said. Let's go to the bank and have a consultation. But just a consultation, nothing more. Beatrice brightened up and kissed me on the cheek. That's a good girl. I knew you would understand. When do you want to go? I asked. Why not tomorrow? Edmund suggested. I'll clear some time in my schedule. I'll pick you up at 10. Tomorrow, I agreed, 10 o'clock. When they left, I sat in Hamish's chair for a long time, thinking. Something told me that the matter would not be limited to a simple consultation. They were up to something, and I had to be ready. My gaze fell on the picture of Hamish and me standing by the lake. Always have a backup plan, Agatha, he liked to say, especially when you're playing with dishonest people. The night passed restlessly. I tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep, my thoughts revolving around my upcoming visit to the bank. Something told me that Beatrice and Edmund were up to something more than a simple consultation. Their sudden concern for my finances seemed suspicious. In the 5 years since Hamish's death, they'd never once inquired about my financial situation, except in hints about selling the house. Now, all of a sudden, they were so eager. The clock on my bedside table read 4 in the morning when I gave up trying to sleep and got up. It was at times like this that I felt Hamish's absence most keenly, Before, when I was worried about something, I could turn to him, whisper my concerns, and he always found the right words. Agatha, he'd say, you're thinking too much. Let's take the problem apart piece by piece. And we did, step by step, until the solution became obvious. Putting on Hamish's old robe, the one I'd kept all these years, I went down to the kitchen and put the kettle on. It was still dark outside the window, but the first birds were already beginning their morning song. I looked at the dark outlines of the garden and remembered how Hamish and I had planted every tree, every bush. This house and garden weren't just possessions, they were a part of us, a repository of our memories. The tea warmed my hands, but it did nothing to dispel my anxiety. I remembered Beatrice and Edmund's visit yesterday, their insistence, their streamlined wording, asset optimization, fiduciary management, maximum efficiency. There was something else behind those beautiful words. I could feel it. At first light, I went up to Hamish's office. Everything had been untouched since the day he'd left. The antique desk, the leather chair, the shelves of books on history and economics, his passion. His glasses and pen were still on the desk, as if he had just stepped out for a moment and was about to return. I opened the top drawer of the desk and pulled out a folder of financial documents. Hamish had always been pedantic about these matters. Every account, every investment was neatly organized into separate files with detailed explanations. He had prepared everything so that I could understand it, even without his help. Going through the papers, I found an envelope labeled Agatha to read if necessary. Strange, I hadn't noticed it before. Inside was a letter dated 2 months before Hamish's death. My dear Agatha, he wrote in his neat handwriting, if you are reading this, it means you have questions about our finances. I hope that a letter will not be necessary and that I will explain everything to you myself. But life is unpredictable. I've noticed Edmund's strange behavior lately. He is overly interested in our investments, asking questions about insurance and retirement plans. Perhaps it's professional curiosity, but my intuition tells me otherwise. I've made inquiries through old friends in financial circles. Edmund's having problems at work, risky investments, disgruntled clients. I'm afraid he may be trying to get to our money through Beatrice. Just in case, I've changed the terms of the will and transferred most of the money to a trust fund, which can only be accessed by your personal presence at the bank. Norton Burroughs, an old friend of ours, has made the arrangements and is holding the documents. Be careful, my dear. Your loving Hamish. My hands trembled as I reread the letter. Hamish had foreseen all of this. He had tried to protect me even after his death, and now his fears were justified. Edmund and Beatrice were indeed trying to gain control of my finances. I folded the letter carefully, returned it to the envelope, and tucked it into the inside pocket of my robe. Then I continued studying the documents. Among them, I found a copy of the will with the bank's marks and several bank statements. They showed that the bulk of Hamish's inheritance had indeed been transferred to a special trust fund, the details of which were not disclosed in the usual documents. The clock struck 7 when I finally gathered up all the papers and locked them back in the drawer, except for one copy of the will, which I decided to take with me to the bank. If Norton Burroughs really did have the trust fund papers in his possession, I would need to talk to him alone, without Beatrice and Edmund. I began to prepare for the day ahead. I showered, styled my hair, picked out my clothes, the blue dress that Hamish always called your battle dress, the pearl necklace, the comfortable but elegant shoes. I wanted to look put together and confident. Over breakfast, I went over possible scenarios in my mind. What if Edmund had already prepared some paperwork for me to sign? What if they tried to pressure me? In the end, I decided that I would insist on a face-to-face meeting with Norton Burroughs. He was a friend of Hamish's. They played golf together on weekends. If anyone could help me in this situation, it was him. At 9 in the morning, the doorbell rang. Too early, we'd agreed on 10. When I opened the door, I saw Beatrice, alone, without Edmund. Good morning, Mother. She kissed my cheek, leaving a trail of expensive perfume. You look well. Ready to go? Good morning, I replied. You're early. We said 10 o'clock. I thought we could stop for breakfast somewhere before the bank. Beatrice walked into the house, glancing around the living room. Your place is dusty again. Why don't you let me hire an assistant? I don't need an assistant. I closed the door. And I've already had breakfast. Where's Edmund? He's meeting us at the bank. Beatrice went into the kitchen and poured herself some water. He had a morning meeting with a client. Something in her tone made me wary. Normally, Beatrice couldn't go 5 minutes without mentioning her husband's busyness and importance. Now she dismissed his absence as a minor detail. What was the meeting? I asked, pretending I was just making conversation. Some kind of investment counseling. Beatrice shrugged. You know Edmund always in business. I nodded, not showing my doubts. If Edmund really wanted to help with my finances, wouldn't it make sense to postpone other appointments? Mother, did you get the papers I told you about? Beatrice looked back at me, as if expecting to see the folder in my hands. What documents? I pretended not to understand. We're just going for a consultation. Beatrice sighed with slight irritation. I texted you yesterday. House deeds, bank statements, insurance policies. Without them, counseling will be pointless. That's odd. I shook my head. Usually you don't need original documents for counseling. It's enough to know the account numbers. Mom? Beatrice rolled her eyes. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Edmund has prepared a special program for your case. He needs all the documents. In that case, why don't we postpone it? I suggested it. I didn't prepare those papers. No, Beatrice answered sharply, then softened. I mean, it's not worth postponing. Edmund made time in his schedule for us. And besides, he already has the basic documents. How? I looked at my daughter carefully. He's a consultant at the same bank, Beatrice reminded me. He has access to client information. Is that legal? I questioned. Of course, she answered too quickly. It's part of his job. That sounded dubious to me, but I decided not to argue. Instead, I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. Then, let's go. The sooner we start, the sooner we finish. Beatrice looked surprised by my compliant attitude, but she was quick to recognize it. That's great, Mom. You won't regret it. On the way to the car, she suddenly stopped. Oh, I forgot my phone in my purse. It's in the living room. Can you go get it? Sure. I went back inside. Beatrice's purse was on the couch. When I opened it, I saw the phone, but my eyes were caught on the edge of some document. I didn't usually rummage through other people's things, but my gut told me it was important. Glancing back at the door, I carefully pulled out the folded sheet. It was a draft power of attorney, exactly what Hamish had warned me about in his letter. A document giving Edmund full authority over all of my assets, including my house, my bank accounts, my investments. It was all filled out, just missing my signature. My heart raced, so no counseling was planned. They were going to bring me to the bank and make me sign this paper. For your own good, Mom. I quickly snapped a picture of the document on my phone, returned it to my purse, and picked up Beatrice's phone. Here, I found it, I said as I walked out onto the porch. It was under the magazine. Thank you. Beatrice took the phone and put it in her pocket. Sit down, I'll turn up the heat. It's a chilly morning. On the way to the bank, Beatrice was unusually talkative. She talked about the children, about her plans for the summer, about Edmund's new project. Not a word about the power of attorney or the sale of the house. You know, she said, stopping at a stoplight, Edmund and I were thinking about going to the Bahamas next month. Maybe you'd like to join us. It would do you good to have a change of scenery. The Bahamas? I acted surprised. Sounds expensive. Edmund got a bonus. Beatrice explained. We can afford a little luxury. Interesting, I thought. In the letter, Hamish had mentioned Edmund's problems at work. And why did they suddenly decide to bring their mother-in-law, who usually visited once a month, and even then only reluctantly? I'll think about it, I replied evasively. First, we'll take care of the bank affairs. Of course, Beatrice smiled. I'm sure after today, you'll see how much Edmund and I care about your future. I remained silent, looking out the window at the houses floating by. Bellefonte was a small town where everyone knew each other. We drove past the school where I'd worked for 4 decades, past the park where Hamish liked to feed the ducks, past the movie theater where we went every Friday. This was my town, my home, and I wasn't going to let Edmund and Beatrice take it away from me. While Beatrice was focused on the road, I pondered my plan. If they really wanted to get me to sign the power of attorney, I needed to find a way to contact Norton Burroughs privately. Perhaps ask to use the restroom and try to find his office, or pass a note through the cashier. In high school, I'd often intercepted notes exchanged between students. Now I was going to be the author of one myself. I had a small notebook and pen in my purse. I always carried them with me, a teacher's habit. While Beatrice was talking about the new car she and Edmund were planning to buy, I discreetly took out the notebook and quickly wrote, "Help. It's not my choice." Folding the sheet 4 times, I tucked it into my sleeve. Mom, are you listening to me? Beatrice's voice brought me back to reality. Of course, dear, I smiled. You were talking about the new car. Yes, Edmund thinks it's time to upgrade the fleet. Beatrice gave me a quick glance. You seem distracted today. I'm just a little nervous, I admitted, playing on her expectations. All this financial stuff. You know your father was always doing it. Beatrice softened. That's exactly why Edmund and I want to help. You don't have to worry about a thing. Thank you, darling. I let the gratitude show in my voice. I don't know what I would have done without you. Beatrice looked pleased. She believed her plan was working, that I was willing to give in. That gave me an advantage. We drove up to the Bellefonte National Bank, a stately columned building in the center of town. Edmund was already waiting at the entrance, glancing impatiently at his watch. Stay here and I'll go get him, Beatrice said, parking the car. Once I was alone, I checked the note in my sleeve and the copy of the will in my purse. Then I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. Despite my age, I still had that steely gleam in my eyes that intimidated careless students. It could come in handy today. Beatrice returned with Edmund. He gallantly opened the car door and gave me his hand. Good morning, Mrs. Hawthorne. He smiled. You look lovely. Are you ready for our consultation? Good morning, Edmund. I let him help me out of the car. Yes, I think I'm ready. Dash good. He cast a quick glance at Beatrice. I've already made all the arrangements. We'll meet Jacob Finch. He's a specialist in asset management. What about Norton Burroughs? I asked innocently. I thought he was an asset manager. Mr. Burroughs is busy today, Edmund answered quickly. But don't worry, Mr. Finch is just as competent. I nodded, pretending to believe him, though my insides clenched. Without Norton, my plan was getting more complicated. Well, I said, heading for the entrance, let's get on with this consultation. The Bellefonte National Bank greeted us with a chill and a muffled hum of voices. The marble floor, the columns, the glass partitions between the departments, all breathed solidity and reliability. Edmund walked ahead, confidently making his way through the spacious lobby. At the receptionist's desk sat a young girl with neatly styled brown hair. Good morning, Mr. Thornton, she said with a friendly smile. The counseling room is ready now. Thank you, Pearl. Edmund nodded. Is Mr. Finch in? Yes, he's waiting for you, she said, glancing at me curiously. I slowed my steps, looking around the bank. Mrs. Patterson used to work here, and she knew every customer by sight. She always greeted me by name and asked about Hamish. Now she was nowhere to be seen. Mrs. Hawthorne, this way, please. Edmund pointed down a hallway that led to the back of the building. Beatrice took me under the elbow, as if she was afraid I might run away. Keep up, Mother. We don't have much time. We passed several offices with transparent walls, behind which bank employees worked at computers. At the very end of the corridor was a door with a sign that read, Confidential Counseling Office. Edmund knocked and, without waiting for an answer, opened it. Inside was a small office with a round desk and 4 chairs. There was a computer on the desk and a stack of papers next to it. A man of about 45 in an impeccable suit stood at the window. Mr. Finch. Edmund extended his hand for a handshake. Thank you for taking the time. Always happy to help a colleague, he replied, shaking his hand. Then he turned to me. You must be Mrs. Hawthorne? It's a pleasure to meet you. Likewise, I said dryly, not hurrying to sit down. There was something about this man that made me uneasy. Too obsequious a smile, too attentive a gaze, as if assessing how much I was worth. And then there was the strange hurry with which everything was happening. Have a seat, Mrs. Hawthorne. Finch pointed to a chair. Tea? Coffee? Water, please, I replied, slowly lowering myself into the chair. Beatrice sat on my right, Edmund on my left. I felt trapped. So, Finch began, taking the seat across from me. Mr. Thornton has told me about your situation. You want to optimize your asset management? Actually, I began, but Edmund interrupted. Mrs. Hawthorne needs a comprehensive solution. Investment management, tax optimization, perhaps a review of the estate structure. Finch nodded understandingly. Of course. At your age, Mrs. Hawthorne, a lot of people are thinking about simplifying their financial management. At my age, I repeated with a touch of irony, a lot of people know the value of pretty words. Beatrice laughed nervously. Mom has always been straightforward. That's from years of teaching literature. A fine profession. Finch smiled. My mother was a teacher, too. He turned to the computer. I've prepared some investment strategies based on the information Mr. Thornton provided. A table of numbers and charts appeared on the screen. Finch began to explain something about interest rates and portfolio diversification, but I barely listened. My gaze was fixed on a stack of papers on the edge of the table. The top sheet was partially visible from beneath the folder. It had the word Power of Attorney on it. I'm sorry, I interrupted. I'm not quite clear what all these strategies are for. My investments are managed according to a plan designed by my late husband. They produce a steady income. Edmund and Finch exchanged glances. Mrs. Hawthorne, Finch began softly. The market is changing. The strategies of 10 years ago are no longer as effective. That's true, Mother, Beatrice encouraged. Dad was a wise man, but he couldn't have foreseen today's financial realities. I looked at my daughter. When had she become such a stranger? This woman in an expensive suit, with flawless makeup and a cold, calculating gaze, seemed like a stranger. Where was that little girl who used to bring me flowers from the backyard and ask me to read her bedtime stories? I need to think, I said. I don't make financial decisions spontaneously. Of course, Finch nodded, but let me present you with all the options so you have a full range of information to think about. He spent the next 20 minutes talking about the benefits of trust management, tax optimization, and how to structure assets at this stage of life. Edmund interjected comments from time to time, and Beatrice nodded with a look of connoisseurship, although I doubted she understood half the terms. I noticed Edmund discreetly glance at his watch. They were clearly in a hurry. But why? Now, Finch pushed a stack of documents toward me. I've prepared the necessary paperwork. These are standard forms, nothing complicated. I took the top document and began to read it carefully. It was, as I suspected, a power of attorney to manage all my assets. It was worded to sound innocuous, but the essence was the same, the complete transfer of control to Edmund. It says here that I'm transferring control of all my assets, I said, looking at Edmund. That's a little broader than investment advice, isn't it? That's the standard wording, Mrs. Hawthorne, Finch replied quickly. In practice, Mr. Thornton will only be involved in optimizing your investment portfolio. Then why not put that right in the contract? I asked. Limit the power of attorney to investments only? Beatrice sighed impatiently. Mom, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. It's a standard document. Thousands of bank clients use it. I am not thousands of clients, Beatrice, I said firmly. I'm your mother, and I want to know what I'm signing. We could make adjustments, Finch suggested, though I could tell by the look on his face that he didn't like the idea. But it would take time. The paperwork would have to be reissued. And when would they be ready? I asked. In a few days, he replied reluctantly. Then let's postpone the signing, I suggested. I'll wait for the amended documents. Edmund and Beatrice exchanged glances. Something had changed in the atmosphere of the office. The tension was almost palpable. Mother, Beatrice leaned toward me. We've set aside today on purpose. Mr. Finch has set aside time for us, too. We can't put things off because of formalities. Signing a power of attorney for all my property is not a formality, Beatrice, I said. It is a serious decision. Mrs. Hawthorne, Edmund interposed. I understand your apprehension, but believe me, we are acting solely in your interests. My interests? I looked him straight in the eye. Or yours, Edmund. His smile became strained. What do you mean? I know about your financial problems, I said quietly. Hamish warned me. Edmund's face froze for a moment, but he pulled himself together quickly. I don't know what you mean. I don't have any problems. You don't? I raised an eyebrow. Then why are you in such a hurry to get control of my money? Beatrice stood up abruptly. That's enough, Mom. Her voice became harsh. You're being paranoid. We're trying to help, and you're accusing us of nothing. I saw Finch squirm uncomfortably in his chair. He clearly wasn't expecting a family scene. I'll leave you two alone for a minute, he said, rising. You two discuss it family style, and I'll get the new forms of agreement. As soon as the door closed behind him, Beatrice turned to me. Her face was contorted with anger. You're ruining everything, she hissed. You always do. We've been planning this for weeks, and you're being so stubborn. Planned what, Beatrice? I asked quietly. To deceive me? Make me sign papers that would put everything I had in Edmund's hands? Don't be so dramatic, she snorted. No one's taking anything away from you. We just want to run things more efficiently. And that's why you prepared the power of attorney in advance? I looked at Edmund and brought me to the bank under false pretenses, talking about a simple consultation. Edmund adjusted his tie, a gesture he always made when he was nervous. Mrs. Hawthorne, you misunderstand. It's just standard procedure. Stop talking sense to her, Beatrice interrupted. She's making things difficult on purpose. She leaned toward me, almost threateningly. You will sign all the papers, and you will stop these silly suspicions. At that moment, the door opened and Finch came back with more papers. Beatrice immediately changed her tone, laughing too loudly and unnaturally. Oh, Mr. Finch, how good of you to come back. My mother and I were just discussing how wonderful it was that Edmund was working with professionals like you. Edmund picked up on her fake laugh, and they exchanged understanding glances. They thought victory was close, that I would give in to their pressure. Finch put the new documents on the table. I've made the adjustments you requested, Mrs. Hawthorne. The power of attorney is now limited to the investment portfolio only. I picked up the document and began to read. At first glance, the changes had been made, but something told me I needed to be more careful. And indeed, in the middle of the text, there was a phrase, as well as other property, including real estate, in case of urgent decisions. What does that mean? I pointed to the line. Finch coughed. It's just legal insurance. In case there's an emergency and you're unavailable, like if I'm in a coma or I'm declared incompetent, I asked. Well, theoretically, yes, he confirmed reluctantly. I put the document on the table. I won't sign it. Not now, not later. Beatrice jumped up. You will sign all the documents, she shouted, no longer hiding her anger. Stop being so stubborn. Edmund and I know best how to handle the money. She turned to her husband for support, and they laughed again, nervously, falsely, as if trying to hide their growing irritation. Beatrice, calm down. Edmund put his hand on her shoulder. Your mother is entitled to her doubts. We just have to do a better job of explaining the benefits. I realized the moment had come. While they were busy with each other, I discreetly pulled a folded note from my sleeve. Mr. Finch, may I ask for a glass of water? I asked. And, if I may, I need to use the ladies' room. Of course, he nodded. I'll walk you out. I'll go with my mother, Beatrice put in quickly. No need, dear, I smiled at her. I'm not so helpless yet that I can't find the restroom. Mr. Finch will just show me the direction. Beatrice reluctantly sat back down. Finch and I walked out into the hallway. The restroom is at the end of the hall to the right, he pointed. I'll get you some water. Thank you. I nodded and walked slowly in that direction. As soon as Finch was out of sight, I changed direction. I needed to find the cashier's room. There must be people there who could help. At the very least, I could just walk out of the bank and call a cab. As I walked out into the main lobby, I saw several teller windows. Behind one of them sat a young woman who smiled welcomingly as I approached. What can I do for you? She asked. I looked around. There was no sign of Beatrice, Edmund, or Finch. I need to speak to the manager, Norton Burroughs, I said quietly. It's urgent. Mr. Burroughs is in a meeting right now. The cashier replied. Can I give him a message? I quickly pulled out a note and held it out to her. Please give him this. Tell him it's from Agatha Hawthorne, Hamish Hawthorne's wife. He'll understand. The cashier took the note, but before she could say anything, I heard Edmund's voice behind me. There you are, Mrs. Hawthorne. We've been looking for you. The restroom's the other way. I turned slowly. Edmund was standing a few paces away, his smile not hiding his irritation. I thought I'd stop by to cash a check first, I lied. A long-time habit. Without a check? Edmund raised an eyebrow. I was just asking about the procedure. I smiled at the cashier. Thanks for the information, sweetheart. The girl nodded, discreetly hiding the note under a stack of papers. Always happy to help, Mrs. Hawthorne. Edmund took me under the elbow, his fingers digging into my arm. Come on, Beatrice is waiting. And Mr. Finch, too. Of course, I let him lead me back to the study. We were almost to the door when a loud voice came from down the hall. Agatha? Agatha Hawthorne, is that you? We turned around. A tall, gray-haired man in an impeccable suit was walking toward us. Norton Burroughs. Norton! I couldn't hide my relief. How good to see you. Edmund tensed visibly, but kept his smile. Dash, Mr. Burroughs. Good afternoon. We weren't expecting to see you. We were told you were in a meeting. Just finished. Norton shook Edmund's hand, then turned to me. Agatha, why didn't you tell me you were coming? I would have made time especially for you. It was a spontaneous visit, I replied. Edmund suggested investment counseling. Did he? Norton looked at Edmund carefully. And with whom are you consulting? Mr. Finch, Edmund replied. He's a specialist in asset management. Finch? Norton frowned. I don't recall such an employee. Edmund paled visibly. He works in our investment department, recently transferred from the head office. Norton shook his head slowly. We haven't had any new transfers in the last 6 months. At that moment, Beatrice came out of the office. What's going on? What's taking you so long? She froze when she saw Norton. Mr. Burrows, we didn't know you were in the office today. Obviously, Norton replied dryly. Mrs. Thornton, your husband says you're consulting with a Mr. Finch. Would you mind inviting him to join us? Beatrice and Edmund exchanged quick glances. He went out to get some papers, Beatrice said uncertainly. At that moment, the cashier to whom I had given the note approached Norton. Mr. Burrows, you have an urgent message, she said, handing him my note. Norton unfolded it, read it, and slowly raised his eyes to me, then to Edmund and Beatrice. His face became serious. I think we need to talk, he said, all of us together, in my office. But we're in a counseling session, Beatrice objected. We can't just— It's not a suggestion, Mrs. Thornton, Norton interrupted. Please follow me, everyone. He turned and headed for the stairs leading to the second floor. We followed him, me with relief, Beatrice and Edmund with ill-concealed anxiety. Norton's office was at the end of the second-floor corridor, a spacious room with panoramic windows overlooking the main street of Bellefonte. He let us in, entered, and closed the door tightly. Have a seat. He pointed to the chairs in front of his desk. When we sat down, Norton walked around the desk and took his seat. He laid my note before him and looked at Edmund carefully. Mr. Thornton, I have received a disturbing message from Mrs. Hawthorne. She claims that she is being forced to sign documents against her will. What do you have to say about it? Edmund laughed nervously. It's some kind of misunderstanding. We were just conducting a consultation on investment optimization. With a non-existent employee? Norton raised an eyebrow. There is no Mr. Finch in the bank, but— Edmund looked back at Beatrice confusedly. He introduced himself as an employee of your bank. He had a pass, an office. Who exactly gave you this office? Norton asked. Edmund hesitated. Yeah, arranged it through a colleague. Through whom exactly? Norton insisted. Edmund was silent, obviously not knowing what to say. Beatrice stood up suddenly. This is ridiculous. We're trying to help Mother with her finances, and you're interrogating her. Edmund, we don't have to put up with this. Mother, we're leaving. We'll find another bank. Norton calmly pressed a button on his phone. Please send security to my office. What? Beatrice was indignant. Why? Because, Mrs. Thornton, Norton replied slowly, there has just been an attempted fraud at our bank. Someone posing as a bank employee tried to get an elderly customer to sign financial documents. It's a serious offense. Fraud? Edmund turned even paler. You can't blame me, us, of fraud. I can, Norton replied firmly, and I will unless I get a satisfactory explanation. He turned to me. Agatha, tell me what happened. I took a deep breath and began to tell the sudden visit of Beatrice and Edmund, their insistence on consulting the bank, the power of attorney I had found in Beatrice's purse, the letter from Hamish. As I spoke, Norton's face grew more and more grim. When I had finished, he turned to Edmund. Mr. Thornton, you've been with this bank for 8 years. You know the rules. No one has the right to give confidential information about clients to third parties, even relatives, without the client's explicit consent. Especially no one has the right to organize bogus consultations with fake employees. I don't, Edmund began, but Norton raised his hand, stopping him. Don't make your situation worse by lying. I'll check the security tapes. If there's a man posing as a bank employee, it'll be a matter for the police. There was a knock on the door and two stout men in security uniforms entered. You called for us, Mr. Burrows? Yes, Norton nodded. Please lock the office door. We have a serious situation that needs to be dealt with. One of the guards closed the door and stood beside it, arms crossed over his chest. The other remained at the window, watching us closely. Beatrice looked around nervously. This is an unlawful restraint. You have no right to lock us in here. Yes, Norton replied calmly. As manager of the bank, it is my duty to investigate any suspicion of fraud on the premises. Now, he turned to Edmund. I want to know who this Mr. Finch is and how he has access to the confidential office of my bank. There was a heavy silence in Norton Burroughs' office. The guard at the door shuffled from foot to foot, but kept his expression impenetrable. Outside the windows was the main street of Bellefonte, people going about their business, unaware of the drama unfolding on the second floor of the old bank building. Edmund sat with his eyes downcast, nervously rubbing the cufflink on his cuff. Beatrice, on the other hand, looked belligerent, chin upturned, arms crossed over her chest. I was infinitely saddened by this picture. My only daughter, my flesh and blood, sat across from me like a stranger, a hostile person. Now, Mr. Thornton, Norton folded his hands on the table. I'm waiting for an explanation. Who is this man claiming to be an employee of my bank? Edmund looked up, his eyes a mixture of fear and calculation. He was clearly weighing his options, calculating the consequences of each possible answer. His name is Oliver King, he said at last. He's a financial planning consultant. Sometimes helps me with clients. Not a bank employee, Norton clarified. No, Edmund admitted, but he has a lot of experience in financial planning. And you brought an outsider into the bank's offices? Gave him access to confidential client information? Norton's voice remained steady, but there was a distinct note of steel in it. It was a mistake, Edmund tried to smile. I admit it, but our intentions were good. We really wanted to help Mrs. Hawthorne optimize her assets. I couldn't take it. Good intentions? Edmund, you tried to trick me into signing a general power of attorney over my entire estate. How is that good? Mother, don't be so dramatic, Beatrice interjected. We just wanted to make it easier for you to manage your finances. Make it easier for you to access my money, I countered. I found a power of attorney in your purse, Beatrice, already filled out, ready to be signed. You planned this in advance. Norton turned to me. Agatha, are you sure the document was intended to be a full transfer of rights? I nodded. Absolutely. I read it carefully. Edmund would be given the right to handle everything, accounts, investments, real estate, without any restrictions or need for my consent. Norton frowned and turned to the guard. James, please check the confidential office on the first floor. There may be some documents left there, and find this Mr. Finch. The guard nodded and walked out, leaving us with another security officer. Mr. Thornton, Norton continued, I must warn you that the situation is very serious. Unauthorized access to official premises, attempted document fraud, and the use of false identities are all criminal offenses. Edmund's face turned even paler. Look, his voice trembled slightly. Let's not be dramatic. There was no fraud. I may have shown overzealous in my desire to help my mother-in-law. Help? I couldn't hold back a bitter chuckle. Hamish was right about you, Edmund. He always saw right through you. What do you mean? Beatrice asked tensely. I took Hamish's letter out of my purse and held it out to Norton. My husband saw all this coming. He left me a warning. Norton read the letter carefully, his eyebrows rising higher as he read. Hamish has always been a shrewd man, he said, handing the letter back to me, and cautious, especially when it came to you, Agatha. What did it say? Beatrice asked demandingly. That your husband is in financial trouble, I answered, and that he might try to get to my money through you. Beatrice laughed, but it sounded false. How absurd! Edmund has a great job, a steady income. We just bought a new car. We're planning a vacation in the Bahamas. With what money, Beatrice? I asked quietly. The bonus Edmund supposedly received, or the money you expected to get from me? Beatrice opened her mouth to object, but Norton raised his hand to stop her. Mrs. Thornton, I must inform you that your husband is in serious financial difficulties. Moreover, there is an internal investigation going on at the bank regarding some of his actions. Beatrice froze, looking at Norton with wide eyes, then slowly turned to her husband. Edmund? What is he talking about? Edmund sat with his head down, his shoulders slumped. Beatrice, I've been meaning to tell you, but I couldn't find the right moment. Tell me what? There was a ring of alarm in her voice. I'm in trouble, he finally admitted. Some investments have gone bad. Very badly? What investments? Beatrice jerked forward. You never told me about any particular investments. Edmund cast a quick glance at Norton, then lowered his eyes again. I invested in a few startups. They seemed promising. Technology companies, cryptocurrencies. I was sure the returns would be huge. But there were no profits, Norton said affirmatively. Instead, you lost all the money you invested, and not just your own. What does that mean? Beatrice asked demandingly, shifting her gaze from her husband to Norton. Norton opened a desk drawer and took out a folder with documents. Mr. Thornton, you do understand that the bank keeps a record of all transactions? Every access to customer accounts is recorded in the system. Edmund didn't answer, but his hands were trembling visibly. In the last 2 years, Norton continued, looking through the documents, your work terminal has been used to make dozens of requests to customer accounts that are not your responsibility, including Mrs. Hawthorne's. It's part of my job, Edmund objected weakly. I'm an investment consultant. I have to analyze various portfolios. Without the client's consent? Norton shook his head. And more disturbingly, some of those clients have subsequently experienced unauthorized transfers from their accounts. A heavy silence hung in the office. Beatrice looked at her husband with growing horror. Edmund, she whispered, what have you done? I was going to give back every last cent. His voice trailed off. These were temporary borrowings. The investment was to be repaid tenfold, and no one would notice a thing. I would have paid the money back with interest. But it didn't pay off, Norton concluded grimly. Instead, you lost that money too, and that's why you needed my money, I said quietly, to cover the embezzlement. Edmund jumped to his feet. It wasn't an embezzlement. I just reallocated the funds to more profitable investments. Temporarily. Sit down, Mr. Thornton, Norton said sternly. The remaining guard stepped forward, and Edmund reluctantly sank back into the chair. Beatrice sat with her hands covering her face. Her shoulders were trembling. How much? She asked at last, without raising her head. How much did you... borrowed? Edmund was silent, staring stubbornly at the floor. According to our preliminary data, Norton replied, about $500,000. Beatrice raised her head, her face contorted with shock. $500,000? Edmund, are you crazy? I'd pay it back, he exclaimed in despair. A couple more good investments and everything would have been fine. And for that, you had to get control of Mrs. Hawthorne's fortune. Norton concluded, to use her funds to cover the embezzlement before the bank discovered the shortfall. Don't say that. Edmund shook his head. I wouldn't have spent Agatha's money for nothing. I would invest it wisely, increase her fortune. How did you maximize those clients' money? I asked bitterly. The same 500,000 that had now disappeared? There was a knock at the door, and the first guard returned. He approached Norton and said something quietly in his ear. Norton nodded and turned to us. We found your Mr. Finch. He tried to leave the building through the service exit. We found forged bank documents on him and several prepared powers of attorney with our institution's hat on them. Edmund turned even paler, if that was even possible. Look, his voice trembled. Let's settle this humanly. I admit I made a mistake, but I can make it right. Give me a chance. I'm afraid, Mr. Thornton, you've already taken that chance, Norton replied coldly. Now we are talking about serious criminal offenses, unauthorized access to bank accounts, embezzlement, forgery, attempted fraud. You can't prove embezzlement. Edmund tried to make his voice sound confident. These were legitimate transactions. The clients gave verbal consent. We have records of all your activities in the system, Norton objected. And I doubt that all those customers will corroborate your words, especially when they find out their money is gone. Beatrice sat with her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold. Her face was slimmer, and dark circles appeared under her eyes. She looked suddenly 10 years older. What about me? She asked quietly. Am I, too, an accessory? That depends on how involved you were in the scheme, Norton replied. Were you aware of the real state of affairs? Beatrice shook her head. No. Edmund always said that we were doing well, that his career was going well. She grinned bitterly. Even that damn trip to the Bahamas he'd planned, and we're $500,000 in debt. She turned to me, tears in her eyes. Mom, I swear I didn't know. I really thought we wanted to help you manage your finances. I looked at my daughter and saw in her the little girl who used to come to me with her troubles. I wish I could believe her now, but there were too many lies between us. Is the power of attorney in your purse? I asked quietly. You didn't know about it either? Beatrice lowered her eyes. Edmund said it was standard procedure, that everyone does it when they help an elderly parent. And you didn't read what it said. My voice trembled with restrained emotion. Didn't you see that it was a full transfer of rights document? I trusted him, Beatrice whispered. He is my husband. At that moment, Edmund suddenly jumped up, overturning his chair. Enough! You have no right to keep me here. I'm leaving, and if anyone tries to stop me, I'll sue you for unlawful detention. He rushed to the door, but a guard blocked his path. Get away, Edmund shouted. You'll all regret this. I have connections, powerful friends. I will destroy you all. Mr. Thornton, Norton said calmly, one more move and I'll call the police, right now, charged with assaulting a bank employee. Call them, Edmund shouted hysterically. Do you think I'm afraid? It's you who should be afraid. When I tell you what goes on in this bank, what frauds have been going on here for years. Edmund, stop it. Beatrice jumped up and grabbed her husband's arm. You're making it worse. Let me go. He tried to break free. Are you against me too? Everyone's against me? Norton pressed a button on the phone. Security, code red in the manager's office, and call the police. No! Edmund rushed to the window, but the second guard intercepted him. Let go of me. I haven't done anything. Mr. Thornton, Norton said firmly, stop your hysterics. Sit down and calm down, or the guards will be forced to use force. Edmund struggled for a few more seconds, then collapsed in the guard's arms, his face contorted with despair. You don't understand, I only needed a few months. I would have gotten it all back. I had a foolproof scheme. Another foolproof scheme? Norton shook his head. Like the ones that got you into $500,000 in debt? There was a knock on the door, and two more guards entered the office. One of them reported, "The police are on their way, sir. They'll be here in 5 minutes." "Thank you." Norton nodded. "Take Mr. Thornton to the guard room and wait for the police." "You can't do this to me," Edmund shouted as the guards took him under his arms. "I'll complain. I'll sue." "Don't make your situation worse, Mr. Thornton," Norton replied coldly. "You're in enough trouble as it is." The guards led the struggling Edmund out of the office. His screams gradually died out in the hallway. It was just me, Beatrice, and Norton. My daughter collapsed back into her chair as if every bone in her body had been removed. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "What's going to happen now?" she asked quietly, without raising her eyes. Norton sighed. "The police will investigate. I'm afraid your husband will face serious charges of financial crimes." "And me?" Her voice was barely audible. "That depends on the outcome of the investigation," Norton replied. "If you were truly unaware of his actions, there will probably be no charges, but you'll have to answer a lot of questions." Beatrice nodded, then turned to me. "Mom, She stammered, unable to find the words. I really didn't know about the embezzlement, but I knew about the power of attorney. Edmund said it was just a formality, that it would help you manage the money more efficiently. She grinned bitterly. How foolish I was. I looked at my daughter and felt mixed emotions. Anger, disappointment, pity, but most of all, a deep, piercing sadness. How did we get to this point? When had the gulf between us become so unbridgeable? "All these years," I said quietly, "have you seen me only as a source of money? A house to sell? Accounts to dispose of?" "No," Beatrice exclaimed. "I mean, not always." She lowered her head. "At first, we really wanted to help, but then Edmund began to talk more and more about how irrationally you use your funds. How much money is spent on maintaining a house that's too big for one person? How those funds could be invested with more return?" "And you agreed." "It was not a question, but a statement." "Yes," Beatrice admitted. "It seemed logical to me. And then it all got a bit complicated. Edmund said that you were being stubborn out of principle, that you'd be better off in a small apartment closer to us, that your money would work better under his management." "And you never once questioned his motives?" I asked. Beatrice shook her head. "I trusted him. He is my husband, the father of my children. I couldn't imagine that he—" Her voice trailed off. There was a heavy silence in the study. It began to rain outside the window, the drops drumming on the glass, as if emphasizing the drama of the moment. "Do the children know?" I finally asked. "Were they in on the plan, too?" "No," Beatrice answered quickly. "They don't know anything. Brandon's in college. Claudia's on a school trip to Washington." She covered her face with her hands. "God, what am I going to tell them? How will I explain that their father has been arrested for financial crimes?" At that moment, there was another knock on the door. A security guard entered. "Mr. Burrows, the police are here. They're waiting in the lobby." "Thank you." Norton nodded. "Tell them I'll be right down." When the guard left, Norton turned to us. "Agatha, Beatrice, I need to meet the police and explain the situation. They'll ask you to testify, too." "I understand," I said quietly. Beatrice nodded without raising her head. Norton stood up from the table. "Agatha, I owe you an apology. If I had been more careful, perhaps we could have prevented this situation earlier. Hamish was my friend, and I let him down." "It wasn't your fault, Norton." I shook my head. "Neither of us could have guessed things would go this far." He nodded and headed for the door, but stopped on the threshold. I'll send someone to escort you to the waiting room. It will be more comfortable there than here. When the door closed behind him, Beatrice and I were alone. The rain outside the window intensified into a downpour. The drops dripped down the glass, blurring the outline of the city. "What are you going to do now?" I asked quietly. Beatrice raised her head. Her face was wet with tears, her makeup smeared, leaving dark streaks on her cheeks. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I need to deal with this nightmare first, talk to the kids, find a lawyer for Edmund." She hesitated. "If, of course, I even want to help him after everything I've learned." She looked at me with pain in her eyes. "What about you, Mom? Can you ever forgive me?" I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hug my daughter, to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay. But the other part couldn't forget her involvement in this plan, her willingness to deceive her own mother. "I need time, Beatrice," I finally said. "Too much has happened today." She nodded, realizing that was the best she could hope for right now. There was another knock at the door, and a young bank employee came in, the same teller to whom I had given the note. "Dash Mrs. Hawthorne, Mrs. Thornton," she said. "Mr. Burroughs asked me to escort you to the waiting room. The police would like to speak to you." The next few days merged for me into one endless, exhausting stream of events. Police interviews, meetings with bank lawyers, countless explanations and retellings of what had happened at the bank. Again and again, I remembered every detail of that day. The power of attorney in Beatrice's purse, the fake Mr. Finch, Edmund's screams as the guards led him away. The Bellefonte police station was as small as the town itself. Officer Molly Prescott, a middle-aged woman with tired but attentive eyes, recorded my statement in a small office with peeling paint on the walls. "So you claim that your son-in-law, Edmund Thornton, tried to fraudulently obtain power of attorney over your entire estate?" she said, looking at me over her glasses. "Yes," I nodded. "He and my daughter Beatrice had brought me to the bank on the pretext of financial advice, but in fact they prepared the documents for a full transfer of rights." "And you believe this is connected with Mr. Thornton's financial crimes at the bank?" "Yes. From what Norton Burroughs said, Edmund was squandering client money on bad investments. He needed the money to cover the shortfall." Officer Prescott tapped her pen thoughtfully on her notepad. "And your daughter? How involved was she in this scheme?" That question was the most painful. I still didn't know how much Beatrice realized about the true purpose of their plan. She claimed she didn't know about the embezzlement and believed they really wanted to help me with my financial management. But she knew about the power of attorney. She knew and didn't tell me. "I'm not sure," I answered honestly. "Beatrice says she didn't know about her husband's financial crimes, but she was definitely involved in the plan to get the power of attorney." "I understand," the officer nodded. "It's a complicated situation. Family matters are always the most complicated." After the interrogation, I was taken home in a police car. The house greeted me with emptiness and silence. I walked slowly into the living room and sank into Hamish's chair. Only now, alone, did I allow myself to truly realize everything that had happened. My only daughter and her husband had tried to trick me into taking everything I had, to use my trust, my love, to gain control of the money that Hamish and I had saved all our lives. How could this happen? When did Beatrice become capable of such a thing? I remembered her face at the police station when we'd accidentally bumped into each other in the hallway. She was leaning against the wall, pale, with circles under her eyes. When she saw me, she jerked as if she'd been hit. "Mom," her voice was hoarse. Are you okay?" "As much as I can be under the circumstances," I answered, stopping at a safe distance. Beatrice looked around, as if checking to see if anyone could hear us, then stepped closer. Mom, look, I know what you're thinking about me right now, but I swear I didn't know about Edmund's shenanigans at the bank. I didn't know about the embezzlement, but you knew about the power of attorney? I said quietly. I knew you weren't just taking me to the bank for counseling. She lowered her eyes. Yes, I did, but I really thought it was for your own good. Edmund was saying that you're becoming less able to manage such complex finances, that people need help as they get older. I'm 73, not 93. My voice had hardened, and I'm perfectly capable of handling my own affairs. I know. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear nervously. I know now. Mom, I'm sorry. I really am. I looked at my daughter and didn't recognize her. Where was the little girl who came to me with the broken knees? The teenager who argued with me about music and fashion, but was always honest? When did she turn into this woman willing to deceive her own mother? Beatrice, I sighed. I don't know what to say. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again. Her face contorted with pain, and then, to my surprise, anger. Trust me? Her voice rose. What about your trust in Edmund? You always looked down on him, always thought he wasn't good enough for me. Because he wasn't, I answered quietly. Hamish had seen that from the beginning. Oh yes, Papa. Beatrice grinned bitterly. Saint Hamish, who never made a mistake, who even from the grave continues to rule our lives. Don't you dare say that about your father. My voice trembled. Why not? She was almost shouting now. He died 5 years ago, and you're still living in the past, still holding on to that huge empty house, his stuff, his investment plan. It's like nothing has changed. I took a step back, stunned by her rage. Is that what this is about? You're jealous of my love for Hamish? That I hold on to his memory? I am jealous that you have always loved him more than me, Beatrice blurted out, tears glistening in her eyes. Always put his opinion above mine. Even now, when he has been gone 5 years, you believe his letter more than you believe me. His letter wasn't trying to trick me, I countered. It wasn't trying to make me sign a power of attorney over all my property. Beatrice clenched her fists. You've ruined my family, she hissed. My husband is in jail. His career is ruined. I don't know how I'm going to pay the bills, how I'm going to explain everything to my kids. All because of your paranoia and stubbornness. No, Beatrice, I shook my head. All because of Edmund's greed and dishonesty, and your blind trust in him. At that moment, a policeman came up to us and told us that I was expected for further testimony. Beatrice turned abruptly and walked away without another word. That was the last conversation we had. I haven't seen or heard from her since. Edmund was arrested and charged with embezzlement, fraud, and forgery. He awaited trial while in custody as he was unable to post bail. Remembering it all now, sitting in an empty house, I felt a strange mixture of release and bitterness. Liberation, because the truth had finally come out, because Edmund's plan had failed, because I had retained control of my life and property. Bitterness, because the price of that victory was my only daughter. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my musings. On the doorstep stood a young woman I didn't immediately recognize. Dash, Mrs. Hawthorne? She smiled uncertainly. I'm Pearl Winters from the Bellefonte National Bank. We saw each other that day. Of course, I remembered her. She was the teller I'd given the note to. Please, come in. Pearl went into the living room, looking around cautiously. You have a very beautiful house, she said. It's so cozy. Thank you. I pointed to the couch. Have a seat. Tea? Coffee? Tea, if I may. She sat down, carefully straightening her skirt. Mr. Burroughs sent me. He thought you might need help with your paperwork and banking after everything that's happened. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. Norton sent you? But isn't this outside the scope of normal banking services? Pearl blushed slightly. As a matter of fact, yes. But Mr. Burrows said you were a special client and that your late husband was a good friend of his. I smiled, feeling unexpected warmth. Hamish had continued to care for me even after his death through his friends, through his providential actions. That's very kind of him, I said, heading into the kitchen to put the kettle on. And yours, too, for agreeing to come. Pearl followed me. Actually, I volunteered. Yeah, I admire you, Mrs. Hawthorne. The way you handled that situation at the bank, that was very brave. I looked at her in surprise. Brave? I was scared to death. But you didn't give up, she smiled. Didn't let them trick you. That's impressive. We returned to the living room with tea, and Pearl pulled a folder of documents out of her bag. Mr. Burrows asked me to help you look into the current status of your accounts. After the incident with Mr. Thornton, the bank did a full audit of all your assets to make sure nothing had been compromised. And what were the results? I asked, feeling slightly uneasy. Everything is fine, she assured me. Mr. Thornton looked at your account information, but he didn't make any transactions. He was probably just planning to act after he received the power of attorney. I exhaled with relief. That was good news. What's more, Pearl continued, Mr. Burrows discovered that your late husband had indeed set up a special trust fund, as mentioned in his letter. The funds in it are managed separately from your main accounts and are protected by additional security measures. She handed me a document. Dash, dash. Here is the information about the fund. Mr. Barrows said you can read it and decide if you want to make any changes to its management. I looked through the papers. Hamish had really thought of everything. The trust fund had been set up so that no one but me could access it, and only when I was present in person at the bank. No powers of attorney were valid for these funds. My husband was a wise man, I said quietly. He had foreseen all this. He cared for you very much, Pearl said softly. You could tell by how carefully he had organized everything. We spent several hours going through the paperwork. Pearl was not only a pleasant conversationalist, but also a competent financial advisor. She patiently explained to me the details I didn't understand, helped me fill out the necessary forms, and made lists of things I needed to do soon. You're much more articulate than most bank employees, I remarked when we were done with the basic paperwork. Pearl smiled. Thank you. I try not to use too much professional jargon. It's more confusing than helpful. As it began to get dark, she gathered her things. I think that's enough for today. I don't want to bore you. If you have any questions, here's my card with a direct number. I walked her to the door. Thanks for your help, Pearl. You don't know how much it means to me. She's suddenly embarrassed. I'm happy to help. E, if there's anything else you need, not just about banking. I mean, sometimes just to talk, or I realized what she was trying to say. You're very kind. I appreciate the offer. After Pearl left, I went back into the living room and sat down in Hamish's chair again. It was getting dark outside the window, but I was in no hurry to turn on the light. In the darkness of the room, I felt my husband's presence, his warmth, his wisdom, his love. You were right about Edmund, I whispered into the void. And you took care of me, even though you knew you wouldn't be there. The next morning, I was awakened by the phone ringing. It was Pearl. Dash Mrs. Hawthorne, good morning. I hope I'm not too early. No, I'm up, I answered, though I was still in bed, thinking about yesterday. Mr. Burrows asked me to tell you that the police have finished their preliminary investigation of Mr. Thornton. They found that he had indeed embezzled client funds to the tune of about $500,000. What about Beatrice? I asked, feeling my heart clench. She's not being charged with accessory to embezzlement, Pearl replied. Investigators concluded that she had no knowledge of her husband's financial crimes, but she could still face charges of attempted fraud because of the power of attorney incident. I closed my eyes. Despite everything that had happened, Beatrice was still my daughter. The thought that she might end up on trial was agonizing. Was there any way to avoid that? I asked cautiously. Pearl was silent. Mr. Burrows said that if you didn't press charges against your daughter, the prosecutor would probably focus only on Mr. Thornton's case. Given the magnitude of his crimes, they might find it inappropriate to prosecute Mrs. Thornton for a less serious offense. I took a deep breath. Tell Norton I won't press charges against Beatrice. All right, Pearl sounded relieved. I will, and, Mr. Burrows has offered to meet with you this afternoon to discuss the way forward. He can come to you if it's convenient for you. Yes, of course, I agreed. Tell him I'll be waiting. After the call, I got up and went to the window. It was a clear, sunny morning. The apple trees were blooming in the orchard, the same ones that Hamish and I had planted years ago. Life went on, despite all the turmoil and loss. I knew there were still many challenges ahead. Edmund's trial, the difficult relationship with Beatrice, the need to rebuild my life. But for the first time in a long time, I felt strangely calm. I had survived the worst of the ordeal, the attempt by those I trusted to take away my control over my own life, and I hadn't given up. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Pearl was there again, this time with a bag from the bakery. I hope you didn't have breakfast, she smiled. I brought fresh scones and coffee. I thought you might not feel like cooking today. I looked up at her in awe. This unexpected gesture of kindness, this simple human contact after all I'd been through, was exactly what I needed. Come in, I smiled back. I was just about to put the kettle on. As we ate breakfast on the veranda, I watched Pearl, young, energetic, with clear eyes and an open smile. She reminded me when I was young, before life had taught me caution and distrust. Why are you so kind to me? I asked bluntly. It was clearly beyond the call of duty. Pearl was embarrassed. You know, when I saw how you stood up to your son-in-law and daughter at the bank, how you didn't give up despite the pressure, it inspired me. I've had people in my life who have tried to manipulate me, use me, and I didn't always find the strength to resist. She looked at me with genuine admiration. You showed me that it's possible to fight for yourself, that it's never too late to assert your independence. I felt a lump come up in my throat. All these days, I'd thought of myself as a victim, deceived, betrayed, alone. Suddenly, someone saw the strength and inspiration in my actions. You are very kind, I said quietly. Thank you. Pearl smiled. You're welcome. You know, Mr. Burrows told me a little about you, about how you taught literature, how you loved your students. He said you were the best teacher in the school. Norton's exaggerating. I waved my hand in embarrassment. I was just doing my job. No, Pearl shook her head. I talked to one of your former students. She works at the bank in the loan department. She still remembers how you supported her when she was in trouble at home, how you helped her to believe in herself. I looked at her in surprise. Who are you talking about? Lizzie Parker. She's Lizzie Green now. Little Lizzie. I smiled, remembering the skinny girl with the huge, sad eyes. She had problems with her father. He drank and didn't always treat her and her mother well. She said you helped her get into college, that without you she never would have gotten out of that house. I shook my head, touched by that memory. I just helped her prepare the paperwork and write her letter of recommendation. She did the rest of it herself. Lizzie had always been a smart and determined girl. See? Pearl smiled. You were making a difference in people's lives, and you continue to do so. How am I changing your life? I asked with mild irony. You show me that it is possible to remain strong and worthy at any age, she replied seriously. That you can stand up to those who try to use you, even if it's someone close to you. We were silent, enjoying the silence of the morning and the taste of fresh scones. I thought about how strange life is. I had lost my daughter, maybe not forever, but the bond between us had been severely damaged. And at the same time, I had found unexpected support from a complete stranger. Pearl, I said, breaking the silence, I think you and I could be good friends. She brightened. I would be very glad to, Mrs. Hawthorne. Please call me Agatha. I smiled. All my friends do. The 4 months flew by. The heat of June gave way to the cool of September, and the summer flowers in my garden gave way to fall asters and chrysanthemums. I sat on the veranda with a cup of morning tea, watching the wind play with the fallen leaves. A lot has changed in these months, both in me and around me. The house on Elm Street no longer seemed so empty and oppressive. I'd finally decided to do some renovations, new wallpaper in the living room, replaced the old curtains with lighter colored ones, cleared out the closet where I'd been storing unwanted things for years. Beatrice's room, which I had kept untouched even after her marriage, was now a cozy study with a desk by the window overlooking the garden. At this desk, I now spent most of my time working on my memoirs, a project I'd thought about for years but always found reasons to put off. Someday later, I told myself, when I have more time, when I'm feeling better, when Beatrice and the grandchildren take an interest in the family history. I now realized that all these excuses were just a way of avoiding the deep feelings that were inevitably awakened by remembering the past. My life had changed in other ways as well. Once a week, I met Pearl Winters for lunch at Martha's, a small cafe on Bellefonte's Main Street. Despite the age difference, we found many common topics of conversation, from literature to cooking recipes. Pearl was remarkably well read for her generation. She adored the classics I taught in school and often asked me to talk about my favorite works. If I'd had a literature teacher like you, I might have chosen a different profession, she said as we shared dessert at one of these lunches. You're a fine banker, I objected. Norton won't stop praising you. Yes, but it's not what I dreamed of as a child. Pearl stirred her coffee thoughtfully. I wanted to write books, or at least work in publishing. Why didn't you try it? My parents insisted on the safe profession. She shrugged. And then life spun, and somehow I didn't have time to dream. It's never too late to start. I covered her hand with mine. Believe me, at 73, I know what I'm talking about. Pearl wasn't the only new person in my life. Thanks to her, I joined a book club that met twice a month at the town library. There, I met several women my own age with whom I quickly hit it off. I became especially close to Vivian Lloyd, the widow of the former mayor of Bellefonte, who shared my love of English classics and jazz music. Agatha, you've blossomed in recent months, Vivian remarked one day as we were returning from a club meeting. There's a certain lightness. I thought about what she'd said. She was right, despite all the drama. I did feel lighter, freer, as if I got rid of a heavy load that I didn't even realize I was carrying. You know, Vivian, I said, sometimes you have to go through something hard to realize how much it was holding you back. We were talking about my relationship with Beatrice. After that incident at the bank, she hadn't tried to contact me. 2 weeks after Edmund's arrest, I received a short, dry letter from her. Mom, I'm taking the kids and moving in with my sister in Portland. I'm selling the house to pay for Edmund's lawyers and pay off some of my debts. Don't try to contact me or my grandchildren. You've chosen your side. I've chosen mine. Beatrice. The letter didn't surprise me, though it hurt. Beatrice had always been stubborn and proud, qualities that I recognized with some humility she had inherited from me. She could not admit her part in what had happened, could not accept that her husband was not the man she thought he was. It was easier to blame me, to make me the enemy, the destroyer of their family happiness. At first, I tried to call her, sent letters and even birthday presents to her grandchildren. Everything came back unopened. In the end, I accepted her decision. You can't force a person to maintain a relationship if they don't want to, even if that person is your daughter. Edmund's trial took place in July. He was found guilty of embezzlement of client funds, fraud, and forgery. The sentence was harsh, 8 years in prison and full restitution upon release. I didn't attend the hearing, but Norton, who testified as a bank representative, gave me all the details. He denied that his actions were premeditated, Norton said when we met in his office after the verdict. He claimed he was just making a risky investment that didn't work out, but the jury wasn't convinced. And Beatrice? I asked. Was she at the trial? Yes, Norton gloomed. She sat in the front row, crying when the verdict was read. I don't think she fully realized the extent of his crimes. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of sympathy and disappointment. Beatrice had always had a tendency to idealize those she loved, to turn a blind eye to their flaws. It made her vulnerable to men like Edmund, men who could manipulate, who could use other people's loyalty to their advantage. What will happen to her now? I asked. As far as I know, she sold the house and moved in with her sister in Portland, Norton answered. No formal charges have been brought against her, given your reluctance to prosecute her and the fact that she was unaware of her husband's financial dealings. I was relieved. Despite everything that had happened, I didn't want Beatrice to end up in prison. She'd already been punished, the collapse of her marriage, the financial problems, the need to start her life over in another city. Thank you, Norton, I said, squeezing his hand, for everything you've done. I was doing my duty, Agatha. He smiled softly. To the bank and to Hamish's memory, he'd be proud of the way you handled all this. The memory of that conversation made me smile slightly. I finished my tea and went back into the house. On the desk was an open notebook with my notes for my memoirs and some travel brochures. Taking one of them, I marveled again at the magnificent views of Venice, the canals, the bridges, the ancient buildings reflecting in the water. Traveling to Italy had been a long-time dream of mine. Hamish and I had planned to go there for our 40th wedding anniversary, but he died a year before that date. I hadn't thought about traveling since then. It seemed sacrilegious to enjoy new experiences without him. But now, after all I had been through, I suddenly realized that Hamish wouldn't want me to give up my life because of his absence. Pearl brought up the idea of traveling during one of our lunches. Agatha, have you ever thought of traveling? She asked. At your age, many people go on trips they've always dreamed of. I had plans, I answered. A long time ago, with Hamish. We wanted to see Italy. So why not make that dream come true now? Pearl's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. You're financially independent. You're healthy. There's nothing holding you back. It would be a wonderful adventure. At first, I dismissed the idea, but it stuck with me. Gradually, I started gathering information on hiking trails, prices, best time to visit. Pearl helped me with internet searches, printed brochures, and told me about her experiences traveling in Europe. And so today, looking at pictures of Venice, I made my final decision. I'm going. Not in winter, when the city often floods, but next spring, when the weather is mild and there are not so many tourists. 2 weeks in Italy, Venice, Florence, Rome, the itinerary that Hamish and I had planned so carefully. Smiling at my thoughts, I put the brochure aside and went back to my memoirs. Today, I was working on a chapter about my childhood, the small Vermont town where I grew up, the strict father and soft, loving mother, the first books that opened me to the world beyond our farm. Writing turned out to be a surprisingly therapeutic endeavor. As I built a timeline of my life, analyzing past decisions and their consequences, it was as if I was living each moment anew, but now with a wisdom and understanding that had been missing before. I saw patterns, recurring situations, moments when I could have made a different choice. It was especially difficult to write about Beatrice, her birth, her childhood, her adolescence, the gradual estrangement that began before Edmund came along. I was a strict mother, often critical, demanding. Hamish balanced my strictness with his gentleness, but still I realize now that many of the conflicts with my daughter had roots in my parenting style. This realization did not cancel Beatrice's guilt in recent events, but it helped me to understand her better, to see the whole picture of our complex relationship. And maybe someday, if fate brought us together again, I could tell her that. Recognize my part of the responsibility for the gulf between us. The ringing of the doorbell interrupted my musings. Pearl stood on the doorstep with a bouquet of fall flowers. Minus surprise, she smiled. I was driving by and thought you might want to take a walk. It's such a beautiful day. I'd love to. I accepted the flowers. Just give me a minute to put them in water and change. While I was fiddling with the vase in the kitchen, Pearl noticed the tourist brochures on the table. Have you made up your mind? She sounded excited. Yes, I smiled, feeling a little nervous. I'm going to Italy in the spring. 2 weeks like we planned with Hamish. Agatha, that's wonderful. Pearl ran up and hugged me. You're going to love it, I promise. Italy is beautiful, especially in the spring. I hope so. I pulled out of the hug gently. But it's a little scary traveling alone at my age. Pearl thought for a moment. What if we didn't travel alone? She suggested. I could come with you, take a vacation for a couple of weeks. I've wanted to go back to Italy for a long time. I looked at her in surprise. Are you serious? You would want to travel with an older woman? An intelligent, interesting, energetic woman who knows more about literature and history than any guide. Pearl corrected me. It would be an amazing trip, Agatha. Think about it. I promised to think about it, though I was inwardly inclined to agree. The idea of having a companion, especially one as attentive and energetic as Pearl, made the prospect of traveling much less daunting. We set out for a walk through autumnal Belfont. The city park was mottled with yellow and red leaves, the old maple trees along the alleys creating a picturesque corridor. We walked slowly, enjoying the fresh air and quiet conversation. I read what you gave me from your memoirs yesterday, Pearl said. It's really fascinating, Agatha, especially the chapter about your work at the school during the political unrest of the 60s. It was a difficult time. I nodded. Many teachers were afraid to touch controversial subjects, but I believed that young people should be able to analyze different points of view and form their own opinions. It's a pity there aren't more teachers like that now, Pearl sighed. In school, we were taught to memorize facts, not to think critically. Times change, I said philosophically. Not always for the better, but not always for the worse. We sat on a bench by the pond where the ducks swam. I fed them the breadcrumbs I'd thoughtfully brought with me, remembering how I'd done it with Hamish every Sunday. You seem happier than when we first met, Pearl said, despite everything that's happened. I thought about what she'd said. I do feel freer, like I've shed a heavy weight I didn't even realize I was carrying. The weight of a toxic relationship? Pearl suggested. Yes, but not just with Beatrice and Edmund. I tossed more crumbs to the greedy ducks. With myself. For years I'd lived with guilt for being too strict a mother, for not always understanding my daughter, for being alive when Hamish died. These events, as painful as they were, helped me see that I shouldn't endlessly punish myself for the past. And now what? Pearl asked. After Italy? I smiled. Who knows? Maybe I'll finish my memoirs. Maybe I'll go on a new journey or start teaching adult literature. Vivian said the community center was looking for volunteers for such courses. Pearl looked at me in surprise. Would you go back to teaching? At 73? Why wouldn't I? I shrugged. Age is just a number, Pearl. It's how you feel inside that counts. And I feel like I'm ready for new beginnings. We sat by the pond until sunset, talking about the future, about books, about traveling. When it started to get dark, Pearl walked me home. Will I see you this weekend? She asked at the door. On Saturday, a new exhibit opens at the City Gallery, paintings by local artists celebrating fall. I'd love to. I hugged her goodbye. Before I went to bed, I went to the picture of Hamish on my bedside table. You were right, darling, I whispered, touching his smiling face with my fingers. It's never too late to start a new chapter of life. That night I dreamed of Hamish. We were standing on a bridge in Venice, the sun reflected in the water of the canal, Italian speech all around us. He was smiling at me with that special smile I loved so much, a little wicked, incredibly gentle. I'm proud of you, Agatha, he said in my dream. You did it, and now you're free. I woke up with a smile on my face and a sense of peace in my soul. A new day was dawning outside my window, a blank slate ready to be filled with new stories, new experiences, a new life that I was just beginning to discover.